The heavy crystal whiskey tumbler slipped from Sophia Mercer's manicured fingers, shattering against the obsidian floor of Ashcroft Global's 55th floor boardroom. Around the massive oak conference table, 20 pairs of eyes watched in stunned silence as the most brilliant marketing executive in Seattle stood trembling, her termination letter still warm from the printer. Liam Ashcroft's icy blue eyes never left hers as security approached to escort her out. But something flickered in their depths, something that looked almost like regret, or perhaps something far more dangerous. She had challenged him, embarrassed him, cost him millions. He had destroyed her career in 60 seconds. Yet 12 hours later, as a relentless November storm hammered against her Queen Anne Victorian windows, his tall silhouette would appear at her door with words that would change everything. "I need you, Sophia, more than you'll ever know." The morning fog drifted in thick gray ribbons across the glass walls of Ashcroft Global, Seattle's most formidable corporate spire, as Sophia Mercer stepped from the private elevator onto the 55th floor. Her heels clicked with confident precision against the polished stone, the sound echoing through corridors lined with digital art installations worth millions. At 29 years old, she commanded attention wherever she walked, not just because of her striking presence, with skin the color of porcelain and eyes that shimmered like emeralds, but because of the sharp intellect that had revolutionized marketing strategies for 3 tech giants in just 5 years. Today felt different. The usual morning hum that pulsed through Ashcroft Global seemed muted, charged with an undercurrent of tension that made Sophia's instincts sharpen. She had called this emergency board meeting herself, something unprecedented for someone at her level, but the Horizon acquisition required immediate attention. Her research had uncovered troubling irregularities that could cost Ashcroft Global not just millions, but its entire future. The boardroom doors swept open before her, revealing the long oak table where 20 of the Pacific Northwest's most powerful business leaders sat in perfect formation. At the head of the table, Liam Ashcroft commanded the space like a monarch holding court. At 36, he possessed the kind of intense magnetism that had graced tech magazines and broken hearts across 3 continents. His sandy hair was impeccably styled, his navy Armani suit tailored to perfection, and those legendary blue eyes that could freeze or ignite with equal intensity were fixed directly on her. "Ms. Mercer." His voice carried the smooth authority that had built a technology empire. Yet today it held an edge she'd never heard before. "How good of you to join us." Sophia felt the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, like the drop in pressure before a cyclone hits. She had worked for Ashcroft Global for 2 years, climbing from senior strategist to head of global marketing through sheer brilliance and unwavering dedication. She had saved the company $15 million with her Asian market restructuring. She had negotiated partnerships that others deemed impossible. Yet something in Liam's tone suggested all of that meant nothing now. "Mr. Ashcroft, members of the board," she began, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "I've called this meeting because my research into the Horizon acquisition has revealed serious concerns that require immediate—" "Your research." Liam's interruption sliced through her words like a scalpel. He stood slowly, his imposing frame casting a shadow across the polished table surface. "Tell me, Ms. Mercer, exactly what authority gave you permission to investigate an acquisition that's already been finalized?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Around the table, she could feel the other board members shifting uncomfortably, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Eleanor Graves, the silver-haired CFO who had mentored Sophia's early career, wouldn't meet her eyes. Marcus Thorne, the head of operations, who had praised her strategic thinking just last week, stared down at his tablet with sudden fascination. "I was doing my job," Sophia said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. The Horizon deal shows clear signs of financial manipulation. Their quarterly reports don't align with their operational capacity. If we proceed, Liam said, walking slowly around the table toward her, we will complete an acquisition that will expand Ashcroft Global into the European markets with unprecedented efficiency. A deal worth $300 million that I negotiated personally over 18 months. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that reminded her of deep forests and forbidden desires. Close enough that when he spoke again, his words were meant only for her, though the entire room heard them with crystal clarity. A deal, he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, that you've just accused me of entering into fraudulently. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she refused to step back, refused to show weakness. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built hung in the balance of this moment. But she had spent 3 weeks analyzing every detail of the Horizon acquisition, had cross-referenced financial records and operational reports until her eyes burned from exhaustion. She knew what she had found. The numbers don't lie, Mr. Ashcroft, she said quietly. Horizon's Munich operations claim to process 3 times their facility capacity. Their labor costs are reported at 40% below industry standard, and their primary investor, enough. The word exploded from Liam with such force that several board members actually jumped. His blue eyes blazed with an intensity that should have terrified her, but instead sent an unexpected shock of electricity through her entire body. You've made your position abundantly clear, Ms. Mercer. He turned away from her, then addressed the room with the commanding presence that had built his empire. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have a fundamental question of trust and authority to address. Ms. Mercer has made serious allegations about a deal that represents months of careful negotiation and due diligence. Eleanor Graves cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps we could review the documentation Ms. Mercer has prepared. No. Liam's voice cut across the suggestion without hesitation. We will not be reviewing anything because Ms. Mercer no longer works for this company. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face, felt the room spin slightly around the edges. Around the table she could see shocked expressions, uncomfortable shuffling. But no one, not one person who had praised her work, who had benefited from her expertise, spoke up in her defense. Security will escort you to your office to collect personal belongings, Liam continued, his voice now completely devoid of emotion. Your access codes will be terminated within the hour. HR will contact you regarding final paperwork and severance. Sophia found her voice, though it sounded strange and distant to her own ears. You're firing me for doing my job? For trying to protect this company? For just a moment, so brief she almost missed it, something flickered across Liam's features, something that looked like pain or regret, or perhaps something far more complex. But then his expression hardened into stone. I'm terminating your employment for gross insubordination and exceeding your authority, he said, effective immediately. Crash. The crystal whiskey tumbler that Eleanor had been nervously holding slipped from Sophia's numb fingers, shattering against the obsidian floor with a sound like breaking dreams. No one moved to clean it up. No one spoke. 20 pairs of eyes watched as Sophia Mercer, the most promising marketing executive in Seattle, stood trembling in the ruins of her career. She lifted her chin with the dignity that had carried her through every challenge life had thrown at her, from growing up in Chicago's South Side to earning her MBA from Stanford, from facing down bias in boardrooms to building campaigns that changed entire markets. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. This isn't over, she said quietly, her eyes locked with Liam's. The truth has a way of surfacing, Mr. Ashcroft. Remember that. She turned, and walked toward the boardroom doors, her heels clicking with the same confidence that had carried her in, though now each step felt like walking through glass. Behind her, she could hear the uncomfortable shuffle of papers, the clearing of throats, the awkward resumption of business, as if her professional execution hadn't just taken place. As the elevator doors closed on the 55th floor of Ashcroft Global, Sophia Mercer had no way of knowing that in less than 12 hours, the man who had just destroyed her life would be standing at her door in the pouring rain, desperate and soaking wet, with words that would shatter everything she thought she knew about truth, lies, and the dangerous space between love and betrayal. Sophia's Queen Anne home on the hill had always been her sanctuary, a carefully curated haven of cool tones and modern comfort that reflected both her sophisticated taste and her deep appreciation for peace. Tonight, however, the familiar space felt hollow, echoing with the ghost of a career that had died 12 hours earlier in a stone-floored boardroom 55 stories above the city. She sat curled in her favorite armchair, a vintage piece upholstered in slate-gray velvet that she discovered at an antique shop in Pike Place. Her laptop was open on the coffee table, the screen displaying her hastily updated resume, but the words blurred together as exhaustion and disbelief warred in her mind. Outside, November rain drummed against the tall windows with increasing intensity, turning the Seattle streets into rivers of reflected streetlight. The termination had been swift and brutal. Security had accompanied her to her corner office, watching as she packed 5 years of achievements into cardboard boxes. Her awards from the Global Marketing Association, the glass sculpture commemorating her Asian campaign success, the framed photo of her grandfather who had raised her with unwavering belief in her potential. All of it reduced to the contents of 3 brown boxes now sitting in her hallway. Eleanor Graves had stopped by as Sophia was clearing out her desk, her silver hair impeccable despite the emotional strain visible in her eyes. "I'm sorry, dear," she had whispered, glancing nervously towards the security guard. "There are things you don't understand, complexities that go beyond—" But she had cut herself off abruptly, pressing a business card into Sophia's hand before hurrying away. The card bore the name of a private intelligence firm downtown, with a handwritten note on the back. Ask them about Ghost Capital. Now, as midnight approached, Sophia turned the card over in her fingers, trying to make sense of Eleanor's cryptic message. Ghost Capital. The phrase echoed something she had discovered in her research, a pattern of shell companies connected to Horizon's financing that had raised red flags but led to dead ends when she tried to investigate further. The sound of her doorbell cut through the night like a siren. Sophia froze, her heart immediately jumping to a rapid staccato rhythm. No one visited at midnight. No one even knew her address except close friends and family, and none of them would arrive unannounced at this hour. She set down her wine glass with careful precision and moved toward the front door, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floors. Through the peephole, she saw him. Liam Ashcroft stood on her doorstep, rain streaming down his sandy hair and soaking through what appeared to be the same navy suit he had worn to destroy her life 12 hours earlier. But this was not the commanding, controlled CEO who had terminated her employment with surgical precision. This man looked haunted, desperate, his blue eyes reflecting something that bordered on panic. For a long moment, Sophia simply stared through the lens, trying to process the impossibility of his presence. The man who had stripped away her career, her reputation, her future, stood on her doorstep in the pouring rain like some noir film hero, except there was nothing romantic about what he had done to her. The doorbell rang again, followed by his voice, muffled by the storm but carrying clearly through the heavy wood. "Sophia, please. I know you're there. I can see the light." She considered ignoring him, letting him stand in the rain until he finally left, and disappeared from her life as completely as her career at Ashcroft Global had disappeared. But something in his tone, a vulnerability she had never heard from him before, made her reach for the deadbolt. The door swung open, and they faced each other across the threshold like adversaries meeting for a duel. Up close, Liam looked even more disheveled than he had through the peephole. His perfectly styled hair was plastered to his head, water dripping from his strong jawline. His suit, which probably cost more than most people earned in a month, was soaked through and wrinkled. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Those legendary blue eyes that commanded boardrooms and charmed investors were filled with something that looked dangerously like desperation. "What do you want?" Sophia asked, her voice carefully modulated to hide the storm of emotions raging inside her. Anger, hurt, confusion, and something else she refused to acknowledge. Something that responded to his vulnerability despite everything he had done to her. "To apologize," Liam said, and the words seemed to cost him enormous effort. "To explain. To ask for your help." She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "My help? You fired me, remember? In front of 20 people. You destroyed my reputation, my career, I had to." The words exploded from him with such intensity that she stepped back instinctively. "God, Sophia, I had to fire you. It was the only way to protect you from what's coming." For a moment, the only sound was the rain drumming against the Victorian facade, and the distant hum of late-night traffic on the wet pavement. Sophia studied his face, searching for signs of deception, for the calculated manipulation that had built his business empire. Instead, she found something that looked frighteningly like truth. "Protect me from what?" she asked quietly. Liam glanced over his shoulder at the empty street, then back at her. "Can I come in? Please. What I have to tell you, it's not safe to discuss on your doorstep." Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door in his face, to retreat into her wounded pride and justified anger. But Eleanor's cryptic warning echoed in her mind, along with the mysteries she had uncovered in her Horizon research. And beneath all of that, despite everything he had done, she felt the pull of the connection that had always existed between them, the professional chemistry that had made their collaborations electric, the way his presence in a room had always made her pulse quicken in ways she had never allowed herself to examine. She stepped aside. Liam entered her sanctuary, bringing with him the scent of rain and expensive cologne, and something indefinable that was purely him. Water dripped from his clothes onto her hardwood floors, but he seemed oblivious to the mess he was making. His attention was focused entirely on her, with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. "You were right," he said without preamble. "About Horizon, about the financial irregularities, about everything." The admission hit her like a physical blow. "Then why?" "Because you uncovered something that 3 other people have died trying to expose." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, but the words chilled her to the bone. "Because the moment you started asking questions about ghost capital and operational discrepancies, you painted a target on your back that I couldn't allow to remain there." Sophia sank onto her velvet armchair, her legs suddenly unsteady. 3 people have died?" Liam moved toward her fireplace, his wet hands braced against the mantel as he stared into the cold ashes. "Elena Vasquez, a financial analyst in Madrid. She discovered irregularities in Horizon's European operations. Car accident, allegedly. Thomas Reed, an investigative journalist in London who was researching international money laundering through shell companies. Heart attack at 34, with no previous health issues. And Dr. Kenji Sato, a cybersecurity expert in Tokyo who traced digital financial transfers that shouldn't have existed. Apparent suicide, though he had just gotten engaged." The room seemed to spin around Sophia as the implications crashed over her. You're telling me that my research put you in the crosshairs of people who killed to protect their secrets? Liam turned from the fireplace to face her, and she could see the weight of responsibility etched in every line of his face. People who are using Horizon Corporation as a front for something much larger and more dangerous than a simple business acquisition. Then why didn't you just tell me? The question burst from her with all the pain and confusion of the past 12 hours. Why humiliate me? Why destroy my career instead of just explaining? Because they're watching everything, Liam said, moving toward her with desperate urgency. Every email, every phone call, every meeting. The only way to get you out safely was to make it look like I had discovered your investigation myself and terminated you for it, to make you appear like a disgraced employee with no credibility, rather than someone with dangerous information. He stopped directly in front of her chair, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This close, she could see the exhaustion etched around his features, the strain of carrying secrets that weighed on him like physical burdens. I've been building a case against them for 2 years, he continued, working with federal investigators, documenting everything. But I needed someone brilliant enough to uncover the financial trail, someone they wouldn't suspect. When you started asking the right questions, I knew you were the key to bringing them down. But I also knew that the moment you got too close to the truth, they would eliminate you. Sophia felt the world shifting around her, reality rearranging itself into patterns she hadn't seen before. So, you fired me to save my life? I fired you to buy us time. Liam's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because I need your help to finish this, Sophia. I need your brilliant mind and your analytical skills and your absolutely fearless pursuit of the truth. But I need you alive to do it. The rain continued its relentless drumming against her windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy around them that felt both dangerous and inevitable. Sophia studied his face, seeing past the commanding CEO facade to the man beneath. Vulnerable, desperate, carrying the weight of lives lost and secrets that could destroy everything he had built. What exactly are you asking me to do? She said finally. Something shifted in Liam's expression, a flicker of hope mixed with determination that transformed his features. I'm asking you to trust me, to work with me, to help me bring down a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of international business and government. He paused, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath. And I'm asking you to do it by pretending to be my lover. The private jet sliced through the crystalline morning air above the Mediterranean, carrying them toward the Croatian coast and a deception that could either save their lives or destroy them both. Sophia pressed her face to the window, watching the azure waters of the Adriatic give way to the rugged cliffs of Dubrovnik, trying to process the dramatic turn her life had taken in the past 72 hours. From terminated employee to undercover operative to fake fiancé, the progression felt like something from a spy thriller rather than her carefully planned reality. Yet here she was, 35,000 feet above Europe, wearing an engagement ring worth more than her annual salary, and preparing to infiltrate the most exclusive corporate retreat in the world. Nervous? Liam's voice carried the warm intimacy they had been practicing for 3 days, though his blue eyes held the sharp focus of a man preparing for battle. She turned from the window to study him, struck again by how dramatically his appearance had changed since that rain-soaked night on her doorstep. Gone was the exhausted, desperate man who had begged for her help. In his place sat the commanding CEO, who graced tech magazine covers, impeccably dressed in Italian cashmere and radiating the kind of confidence that moved markets and broke hearts. But now she could see beneath the facade, could recognize the calculated performance for what it was. Should I be nervous about the mission, or about convincing people we're madly in love? She asked, unconsciously twisting the magnificent diamond on her finger. The ring was a masterpiece of deception itself, a 5-carat emerald-cut stone surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the morning light like captured stars. Liam had presented it to her at their final briefing, sliding it onto her finger with a reverence that felt dangerously real. "Both," he admitted, his mouth curving in a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Anton Kirov doesn't trust anyone, and he certainly doesn't trust sudden romantic attachments among his business associates. We'll need to be completely convincing." Sophia nodded, though her stomach clenched at the thought of the performance ahead. Anton Kirov was the ghost in the machine, the phantom investor whose name appeared nowhere in official documents, but whose influence reached into every aspect of the Horizon conspiracy. According to Liam's federal contacts, Kirov used his annual Dubrovnik retreat to conduct the most sensitive aspects of his international money laundering operation, bringing together a carefully selected group of executives who facilitated the movement of billions through seemingly legitimate business acquisitions. The invitation to Ashcroft Global had come through normal channels, a reward for Liam's successful completion of the Horizon deal. But now they knew it was something far more sinister, an induction into the inner circle of financial criminals who used corporate structures to fund everything from arms dealing to human trafficking. "Tell me again why a sudden engagement won't seem suspicious," Sophia said, smoothing the silk of her designer dress. The pale ivory creation was perfectly chosen to suggest understated elegance and new money, the kind of sophisticated simplicity that would appeal to European tastes while positioning her as a worthy companion for one of America's most eligible bachelors. "Because Kirov's intelligence network will have already discovered that I fired my head of marketing last week," Liam replied, his voice taking on the cold calculation she had learned to recognize as his strategic mode. "They'll have learned about your termination, your brilliant career, your sudden fall from grace. What they won't know is that I've been quietly pursuing you for months, that your professional disgrace gave me the perfect opportunity to sweep you away from your ruined career with promises of love and luxury. The story was brilliant in its simplicity and completely believable to anyone who didn't know the truth. Powerful men had been rescuing beautiful, intelligent women from professional disasters since the beginning of time. The fact that their fake romance would appear to follow such a classic pattern made it the perfect cover." "And if they dig deeper?" Sophia asked, though she already knew the answer. Liam's federal contacts had spent 2 days creating a digital trail of their supposed courtship. Carefully timed restaurant reservations, flower deliveries to her apartment, even a few strategically leaked photos of them entering and leaving the same Seattle buildings at romantically appropriate intervals. "They'll find exactly what we want them to find," Liam said. "A whirlwind romance between a heartbroken CEO who fell for his brilliant employee and a devastated woman who found salvation in the arms of the man who destroyed her career. It's the kind of twisted fairy tale that people like Anton find completely believable." The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing their descent into Dubrovnik. Below them, the Croatian coastline spread out like a painting, all terracotta roofs and ancient stone walls leading toward the shimmer of the sea. In 2 hours, they would be at Villa Adriatica, Kirov's legendary estate that occupied an entire cliffside overlooking the water. "Sophia." Liam's voice had changed, becoming softer, more intimate. When she looked at him, she was startled by the intensity in his expression. "Before we do this, before we step into that world, I need you to know something." Her heart began beating faster, though she couldn't say why. "What?" "What I did to you in that boardroom, the way I fired you, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do." His blue eyes held hers with unwavering honesty. "I've built my entire career on protecting the people who work for me, on creating environments where brilliant minds can thrive. Destroying yours, even temporarily, even for the right reasons, it goes against everything I believe in." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, piercing through the professional distance she had been carefully maintaining. For 3 days, they had worked together with military precision, rehearsing their cover story, memorizing details about Kirov's operation, learning to move and speak like lovers. But this was the first time he had addressed the emotional reality of what had passed between them. "I know," she said quietly. "I figured that out when you showed up at my door, looking like you'd been through hell." "I had been," Liam admitted. "I spent 12 hours convinced I had destroyed the career of the most brilliant woman I'd ever worked with. Convinced that I had sacrificed your future for the greater good, and that you would spend the rest of your life hating me for it." Something shifted in the air between them, a charge that had nothing to do with their mission, and everything to do with the man and woman beneath the carefully constructed facades. Sophia felt her breath catch as she realized they were venturing into dangerous territory. Not the physical danger they would face in the next few days, but the emotional minefield of genuine feelings in the middle of an elaborate deception. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam leaned closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of slate in his blue eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Now I'm terrified that after all this is over, after we've brought down Anton and his network, you'll disappear from my life, and I'll spend the rest of mine remembering what it felt like to have you by my side." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Outside the windows, the Adriatic coast rushed past in a blur of sunlight and ancient beauty. But inside the private jet's luxury cabin, the world had narrowed to the space between their bodies and the dangerous honesty in Liam's voice. "Liam," Sophia began, but her words were interrupted by the subtle change in the jet's trajectory that announced their final approach to the airport. He pulled back slightly, and she watched as the vulnerable man disappeared behind the commanding CEO mask once again. But something had changed between them. Some line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. When he spoke again, his voice carried the warm intimacy of their cover story, but beneath it, she could hear the echo of deeper truths. "Are you ready for this, darling?" he asked, the endearment rolling off his tongue with practiced ease, even as his eyes held depths of meaning that went far beyond their mission. Sophia straightened in her seat, feeling the cool weight of the engagement ring against her finger, and the warm weight of his confession settling into her heart. In a few hours, they would be walking into a nest of international criminals, playing the most dangerous game of their lives with stakes that could cost them everything. But as she looked into Liam Ashcroft's blue eyes and saw the man behind the legend, she realized the most dangerous part of their mission might not be infiltrating Anton Kirov's operation. It might be pretending to be in love, when the line between performance and reality was becoming more blurred with every passing moment. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with corporate espionage and everything to do with the terrifying possibility that her fake engagement was beginning to feel like the most real thing in her life. The jet touched down on Croatian soil, carrying them toward Dubrovnik, toward Villa Adriatica, toward a confrontation that would either destroy Anton Kirov's criminal empire or cost them their lives. But as Liam took her hand to help her from her seat, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary, Sophia wondered if they were also flying toward something that could destroy them in an entirely different way. The kind of destruction that came not from bullets or betrayal, but from falling in love when the stakes were too high and the game too dangerous for anything as simple as a happy ending. Villa Adriatica existed like a fever dream of European luxury, perched on its private cliffside, where the Adriatic's crystalline waters reflected centuries-old pines and stone terraces that seemed to flow seamlessly into the landscape itself. For 3 days, Sophia had moved through its corridors and gardens like an actress in the most important performance of her life. Her hand linked with Liam's. their fabricated love story unfolding with convincing authenticity before Anton Kirov's calculating eyes. Now, as evening shadows lengthened across the villa's breathtaking grounds, she stood in their suite's marble bathroom, studying her reflection in the gold-framed mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, elegant in a way she had never quite achieved before, softened by something that had nothing to do with the Croatian sunset filtering through silk curtains, and everything to do with the dangerous intimacy that had been growing between her and Liam with each passing hour. Their performance had been flawless. At yesterday's dinner, she had watched Liam charm Kirov's guests with the perfect combination of American confidence and European sophistication, while she played the role of the brilliant woman rescued from professional disgrace by overwhelming love. They had walked hand in hand along the cliffs, sat together during interminable business discussions, shared private jokes and stolen glances with the natural rhythm of longtime lovers. But somewhere between the carefully rehearsed gestures and the meticulously planned conversations, something real had begun to emerge. It started in small moments, the way Liam's hand would find the small of her back when he thought no one was watching, the genuine laughter that escaped when she whispered sardonic observations about their fellow guests, the protective edge in his voice when one of Kirov's associates looked at her with too much interest. Through the bathroom's open door, she could hear Liam moving around their bedroom, preparing for tonight's crucial dinner, where Kirov would finally reveal the full scope of his operations to what he believed was Ashcroft Global's newest partner. She had spent hours memorizing the questions that would extract the information federal investigators needed while appearing to flow naturally from a new girlfriend's curious interest in her lover's business. "Sophia," Liam's voice carried through the suite's elegant space. "We need to leave in 20 minutes. "Almost ready," she called back, though her hands shook slightly as she fastened the delicate diamond earrings that completed her evening ensemble. The trembling had nothing to do with nervousness about their mission, and everything to do with what had happened 3 hours earlier, when their carefully maintained professional distance had finally shattered completely. She had been reviewing her notes one final time, curled in the suite's silk-upholstered window seat overlooking the sea, when Liam emerged from the bathroom fresh from his shower. He wore nothing but a towel wrapped around his lean waist, water still glistening on his chest, his sandy hair damp and tousled in a way that made him look younger and infinitely more approachable than the commanding CEO who dominated boardrooms. "Sorry," he had said, noticing her startled glance. "I forgot to grab my shirt. Pardon." But instead of hurrying past her to the wardrobe, he had paused beside the window seat, something in her expression stopping him. For a long moment, they had simply looked at each other, not as co-conspirators or fake lovers, but as a man and woman who had been fighting an increasingly powerful attraction while navigating deadly waters together. "This is insane," Sophia had whispered, though whether she meant their mission or the tension crackling between them, neither of them could say. "Completely," Liam had agreed, his voice rough with something that had nothing to do with his recent shower and everything to do with the way she was looking at him. He had moved closer then, close enough that she could see water droplets still clinging to his collarbone, could smell the expensive soap, and something that was purely him. When he reached out to touch her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheekbone with reverent gentleness, she had leaned into the caress like a flower, turning toward sunlight. "We shouldn't," she had breathed, even as her body betrayed her by moving closer to his. "I know," he had replied, his thumb brushing across her lower lip with maddening softness. "But God help me, Sophia. I can't stop thinking about you. Not as my partner in this mission, not as the brilliant woman I'm supposed to be protecting, but as you. Just you." The confession had shattered the last of her resistance. When his lips finally found hers, The kiss had been everything she had unconsciously been longing for, desperate and tender and filled with weeks of suppressed desire. His hands had tangled in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space between them, until the expensive silk of her dress was the only barrier between her skin and his. But even as her body had responded to his touch with an intensity that frightened her, some part of her mind had remained coldly analytical, cataloging the dangerous shift in their relationship and the complications it would create. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she had seen her own conflict reflected in his blue eyes. "This changes everything," she had said quietly. "I know," Liam had replied, his hands still tangled in her hair. "And we still have a job to finish." Now, 3 hours later, Sophia emerged from the bathroom to find him waiting for her, impeccably dressed in a midnight blue dinner jacket that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the commanding presence that had built his empire. When his eyes met hers, she saw the same desire that had nearly consumed them both that afternoon, carefully banked, but still burning just beneath the surface. "You look incredible," he said, his voice carrying the warm appreciation of their cover story, even as his gaze held depths of genuine emotion that made her pulse quicken. She had chosen her dress carefully, a creation of deep sapphire silk that flowed like water around her curves while maintaining an air of sophisticated elegance that would appeal to European sensibilities. With her hair swept up in an artful chignon and the engagement ring catching the light on her finger, she looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, the cherished fiancée of one of America's most successful CEOs. "Thank you," she replied, moving toward him with the natural grace that had become second nature during their 3 days of performance. When she reached him, he offered his arm with the courtly gesture that had charmed every woman at the villa, but his touch sent electricity through her system that had nothing to do with acting. They made their way through Villa Adriatica's marble corridors toward the dining room where Anton Kirov held court, their footsteps echoing softly against centuries-old stone. Other guests moved past them in evening attire that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, all of them players in Kirov's elaborate game of international financial manipulation. "Remember," Liam murmured, as they approached the dining room's towering doors, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Tonight, he reveals the Singapore operation. We need specifics about the shipping routes and the Swiss account numbers." Sophia nodded, though part of her attention was focused on the way his hand felt against her back, warm and protective and utterly distracting. "And if he becomes suspicious?" "We improvise," Liam replied, his blue eyes holding hers with unwavering confidence. "Trust me, Sophia. Whatever happens in there, I won't let anything happen to you." The promise carried weight beyond their professional partnership, beyond even their physical safety. It was the vow of a man who had revealed his heart that afternoon, and was now prepared to protect both her life and the fragile beginning of something that felt infinitely precious and equally dangerous. The dining room doors swept open before them, revealing Anton Kirov's inner sanctum in all its dark magnificence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a table that could seat 20, though tonight only 8 places were set. Anton himself stood at the far end of the room, his gray hair gleaming as he spoke quietly with a woman whose sharp features and calculating eyes marked her as someone accustomed to violence. When Anton saw them enter, his face transformed with the predatory smile that had charmed and destroyed in equal measure across 3 decades of international crime. "Liam, my friend," he called out in accented English that carried traces of his Russian origins. "And the beautiful Sophia, come, come. Tonight we celebrate new partnerships and profitable futures." As they moved deeper into the room, Sophia felt the weight of multiple gazes assessing her, measuring her value and her potential threat level. But beneath her awareness of the danger that surrounded them, she was conscious of something far more immediate and equally perilous. The way Liam's presence beside her felt like home, like safety, like the missing piece she hadn't known her life was lacking. Tonight would either complete their mission successfully or cost them everything. But as Anton raised his crystal wine glass in a toast to new alliances and old friendships, Sophia realized that somewhere between corporate espionage and fake romance, she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with the man whose engagement ring graced her finger. The most dangerous part of their mission was no longer infiltrating a criminal organization or gathering evidence for federal prosecutors. The most dangerous part was pretending that the love blazing between them was just another performance when every instinct she possessed was screaming that it was the most real thing she had ever experienced. 6 months after Villa Adriatica, Sophia stood in the elevator ascending to the 55th floor of Ashcroft Global, her heart racing with a combination of anticipation and disbelief. The familiar hum of the machinery, the soft lighting, the subtle scent of expensive leather and success, all of it exactly as she remembered from the morning her world had exploded in a stone-floored boardroom. But everything else had changed in ways she was still learning to comprehend. The elevator doors opened with their familiar whisper, revealing corridors that bustled with the controlled energy of a business empire operating at peak efficiency. Employees moved past with the confident purpose she recognized from her own tenure here, but now their eyes held a respect tinged with something approaching awe. Her story had become legend within the company. The brilliant executive who had been fired for discovering the truth, only to return 6 months later as both the woman who had helped bring down an international criminal conspiracy and the fiancé of the man who ruled it all. Eleanor Graves appeared as Sophia stepped from the elevator, her silver hair impeccable as always, but her expression radiating the warmth that had been carefully hidden during those dark days when Anton Kirov's reach extended into every aspect of their professional lives. "Welcome home, dear," Eleanor said, embracing her with genuine emotion. "I can't tell you how wonderful it is to have you back where you belong." "It feels surreal," Sophia admitted, looking around the familiar space that no longer felt quite real. 6 months ago, I was escorted out of here with my belongings in cardboard boxes. Now you're the chief strategic officer with an office that overlooks Elliott Bay and a budget that would make most CFOs weep with envy, Eleanor finished with a laugh. Plus, you're engaged to the most eligible bachelor in Seattle. Not bad for someone who was supposedly disgraced and unemployable. The promotion had been Liam's idea, though he had presented it with the kind of meticulous business logic that made it impossible to argue with. Ashcroft Global needed someone brilliant enough to oversee their expansion into international markets, someone with the analytical skills to spot the kind of financial irregularities that had nearly destroyed them, and someone with the courage to act on their convictions regardless of personal cost. The fact that this person also happened to be the woman he loved was, he claimed, merely a happy coincidence. "Is he in his office?" Sophia asked, though her pulse quickened at the thought of seeing him. 6 months of working together had only deepened what had begun in Croatia, transforming their desperate attraction into something far more profound and infinitely more precious. "Conference room C," Eleanor replied with a knowing smile. "Final preparations for the Tanaka Industries acquisition. He said to send you in the moment you arrived." Sophia made her way through corridors that felt both familiar and strange, acknowledging greetings from colleagues who had witnessed her professional execution and resurrection with equal fascination. The Tanaka acquisition represented everything she had fought for during those terrifying weeks when Kirov's conspiracy had threatened to destroy everything Liam had built. Clean financing, transparent operations, and business partners who viewed success as something to be earned rather than stolen. She found him exactly where Eleanor had indicated, standing at the head of a conference table surrounded by legal documents and financial projections. His attention focused with laser intensity on the details that would determine whether Ashcroft Global's latest expansion succeeded or failed. Even after 6 months of intimate proximity, the sight of him still took her breath away. The commanding presence that had built an empire, the blue eyes that could freeze or ignite with equal power, the way he moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had never learned to doubt his own capabilities. When he looked up and saw her in the doorway, his expression transformed with the kind of joy that made her believe in fairy tales, despite everything her rational mind knew about the complexities of love and business and the dangerous intersection between them. "There she is," he said, moving toward her with the fluid grace that had charmed her from their very first meeting. "How did the morning interviews go?" The morning had been spent with 3 different news outlets, all of them fascinated by the story of the executive who had uncovered an international conspiracy and lived to tell about it. Federal prosecutors had finally given clearance for her to discuss certain aspects of the Anton Kirov investigation, though the most sensitive details would remain classified for years to come. "Exhausting," Sophia admitted, moving into his embrace with the natural ease that still amazed her. "Everyone wants to know about the dramatic confrontation, the moment when Anton realized we had been playing him from the beginning. No one seems interested in the weeks of financial analysis that actually made it possible." Liam's laugh rumbled through his chest, where her cheek rested against his shirt. "That's because financial analysis doesn't make good television. Dramatic confrontations in Croatian villas with international criminals, on the other hand. The confrontation had indeed been dramatic, though not in the way the media loved to imagine. Anton had been arrested not during some elaborate shootout, but while reviewing shipping manifests in his villa's library, surrounded by federal agents who had materialized with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had been planning the operation for months. The evidence that Sophia and Liam had gathered during their 3 days at Villa Adriatica had provided the final pieces of a puzzle that implicated over 40 international businesses in money laundering operations that stretched from Singapore to Zurich. "Any word from the federal prosecutor's office about the sentencing?" Sophia asked, though part of her attention was focused on the way Liam's hands felt against her back. Warm and possessive, and utterly right. 25 to life, and that's just for the charges they can prove in domestic courts," Liam replied. "Anton Kirov's empire officially ceased to exist 3 days ago when the Swiss authorities froze the last of his accounts." It should have felt like complete victory, and in many ways it did. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy Ashcroft Global had been neutralized. The people responsible for multiple murders had been brought to justice, and the international business community was slowly beginning to trust that legitimate companies could compete without worrying about criminal enterprises undermining their efforts through violence and corruption. But standing in Liam's arms in the conference room where their professional partnership had been born, Sophia was aware that their personal victory was far more complex and infinitely more precious than anything they had achieved in the realm of corporate espionage. "I have something for you," Liam said, his voice carrying a note of carefully controlled emotion that immediately captured her complete attention. He moved to his briefcase and withdrew a small velvet box, though this one was different from the dramatic engagement ring that still graced her finger. This box was smaller, older, worn with the kind of patina that suggested it had been treasured for generations. "The engagement ring was chosen for its ability to convince Anton that you were properly valued," Liam said, opening the box to reveal a vintage piece that took her breath away. A sapphire, the color of midnight, surrounded by diamonds that caught the afternoon light, like captured starfire. "But this belonged to my grandmother. She gave it to my grandfather during the war when he was shipping out to Europe, and they had no idea if they would ever see each other again." Sophia felt tears building behind her eyes as she understood the significance of what he was offering her. Liam. They were married for 63 years, he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his blue eyes. Through wars and recessions and the kind of challenges that destroy most relationships. When my grandmother died, she made me promise to save this ring for the woman who would be my partner in every sense of the word. My equal. My match. He took her left hand with reverent gentleness, sliding the vintage ring onto her finger alongside the dramatic engagement piece. I love you, Sophia Mercer. Not because you helped me save my company, not because you risked your life to bring down a criminal conspiracy, but because you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known, because you challenge me to be better than I am, because you make me believe that fairy tales can actually come true. The confession hung between them like a bridge spanning the distance between what they had been and what they were becoming. Outside the conference room windows, Seattle spread out in all its rain-washed complexity, the city that had brought them together and nearly torn them apart, and finally allowed them to find something worth building a lifetime around. I love you too, Sophia whispered, the words carrying the weight of everything she had learned about trust and risk, and the terrifying beauty of opening your heart to someone who could destroy you with equal ease. I love your brilliant mind and your impossible standards and the way you protect the people who matter to you. I love that you fired me to save my life. And I love that you're arrogant enough to think you can make up for it by giving me the best job in Seattle and a family heirloom. Liam's laugh was pure joy, the sound of a man who had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. When he kissed her, it carried all the passion that had nearly consumed them in Croatia, and all the deep affection that had grown between them during the months of building something real together. So, he murmured against her lips, does this mean you'll marry me for real this time? Not as part of an undercover operation designed to infiltrate international criminals? I suppose I could be convinced, Sophia replied, though her smile made it clear that no convincing would be necessary. Though I have one condition. Anything. The next time you need to protect me from murderous conspirators, try talking to me instead of destroying my career. I'm reasonably intelligent. I might have been able to help you come up with a plan that didn't involve public humiliation. Liam's grin was pure mischief, the expression of a man who had learned that the best relationships were built on equal measures of passion and laughter, and the kind of trust that could survive anything life threw at them. Deal, he said, sealing the promise with another kiss that tasted like new beginnings and infinite possibilities. Outside the conference room windows, Seattle glittered in the afternoon sun, a city of innovation where anything could happen, and often did. Inside Ashcroft Global's stone corridors, employees went about their business with the satisfied efficiency of people who worked for a company that valued both integrity and results. And in Conference Room C, two people who had found love in the most unlikely circumstances stood wrapped in each other's arms, planning a future that would be built on the solid foundation of mutual respect, shared challenges, and the kind of love that could survive corporate conspiracies, international criminals, and even the occasional necessity of fake engagements. The ring that had belonged to Liam's grandmother caught the light as Sophia lifted her hand to cup his face, a symbol of enduring love that had survived war and separation, and 6 decades of the kind of challenges that destroy weaker bonds. As she looked into the blue eyes of the man who had fired her to save her life, and then spent 6 months proving that some fairy tales actually could come true, she knew that their love would prove equally enduring. After all, they had already survived the hardest part. Everything else would be easy by comparison.